Hello and welcome to the Wednesday, February 13th edition of the Cluster API Project Office Hours. We have a relatively short agenda today, so if you do have any topics, please go ahead and add them to the agenda. And I will go ahead and link the agenda back in the chat again for anybody who's joined recently. All right. To start with, it looks like we have Siddharth for awareness of a PR for changing the default cache sync period.
Sure. Hi. So this is like a behavior change that I noticed after we moved to CRD based implementation. And thanks to Daniel, he helped me kind of find this issue. So I initially noticed this problem in the vSphere provider implementation like a couple of weeks back, wherein this controller loop that is supposed to kind of catch up every X second was not happening. And I noticed that from an observation point of view, I noticed that it was doing it like in 10 hours, but I didn't know where it was set. And Daniel kind of helped me narrow that down. So thanks to him. So I thought, one other thing that I noticed is like all the providers are actually not overriding any of this default sync values. So pretty much this behavior is going to be common for all providers. So just to highlight one simple use case where this might be impacting every provider is if from your infrastructure, so let's say once you create a machine object and your actuator actually creates a underlying VM in the provided infrastructure. And if somebody were to go back directly to the infrastructure and delete that VM, now usually unless your actuator is activated again by the sync call, your actuator will never know and realize that the infrastructure VM is gone and will never recreate that. Now, before CRD, pre-CRD, this time was, I believe, I don't know what was the exact time duration, but I believe it was in some seconds or maybe a minute or so, kind of a duration. So every minute or that smaller duration, the actuator will come in and will detect that, oh, that instance is gone from the backend, and the provider would recreate it. But now that behavior will not happen because the default sync is now actually 10 hours. So I thought I'll just bring it for awareness for every provider as well. So in the PR or in the issue, I also noted where to set that particular timeout, how to override that. But just a note, I'm still actually verifying that. I haven't really verified that time sync, but looking at the code seems like that will be the right place to set. I think maybe this is something that we should document so that any new provider who is going to come up in the future should be aware of this fact. I'm not sure where will be the right place. Maybe in the Git book somewhere. So that's about it. Any suggestions are welcome to what should be the ideal default sync period. I'm not sure what the answer is, but maybe this group has enough knowledge that they can kind of suggest what should be the default one that every provider as a guidance should follow.
Does anybody have a strong opinion there?
Well, before we answer what the best value should be, why does the CRD code that the Kube builder set this timeout for so long? That's what I'd like to know.
So historically, there were two reasons I was told for why the resync period would be set. One was to paper over potential bugs so that if events were missed, the resync period would ensure that eventually they would be noticed. But there's another reason, which is what I think this issue is about, and that is that if you want the actuator to respond to external events, it needs to wake up periodically and check to see if the external state still matches the internal state. So because of those two reasons, I speculate that Kube Builder made this longer because we believe that there are no longer any race conditions which cause events to be missed. But I think by setting it longer, we lose the ability for the actuator to be able to verify changes to external state, which may occur independent of anything the actuator is doing. So I'll stop there. That's my understanding of why it might be set that way. We might check with the builder.
I believe that is spot on, and I think the other aspect is that there is a trade-off here, which is, why don't we set it to 1 second, right? And it's because you would then have all these sort of spurious or cleanup resyncs. And for example, on AWS, you might well hit a rate limit on touching how often you're allowed to make calls against your cloud. So there is a not too low trade-off there as well in terms of resources, both in the controller itself and against the cloud that you are probably operating on.
So that's an interesting point, because if we agree that this is necessary for some providers, my preference would be not to document it and instead choose the same default. But as you point out with AWS, it may not be that there's a provider independent default that makes sense. So
I would be very happy. Yeah, I would be very happy to set a much lower limit. It feels like that is the correct thing to do. And then when you start seeing AWS rate limits, there are other strategies, for example, like polling AWS or polling your cloud, every minute or whatever it is, and keeping a cache rather than sort of polling it on demand. And we sort of started to inch towards those in the cloud provider, but we never got all the way. But I think it's a good thing to have it low, but I'm just trying to explain why we might not, or make the case why we don't set it to 1 second type thing.
Sure.
So if I'm not mistaken, pre-CRD migration, I believe we were resyncing it was either 5 or 10 minutes.
I believe it might be shorter than that, but I'm not 100% sure, but we can probably dig deeper in the code to see.
Yeah, I just remember we had an issue with the AWS provider where the exponential backoff for retries wasn't happening. So we would try 10 times really fast in succession. And then it would be, I couldn't remember, it was either 5 or 10 minutes later, we would kind of re-reconcile.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So what does everybody want the sync time to be?
I have one small point. So I think I missed something in between. So for the resync, I think there are two different aspects, right? So first aspect is that we want to continuously sync the entire cache with the Kubernetes API server's cache. So we want to mirror that. That's one resync period, and the other period is what was just discussed by Siddharth, is that we want to continuously make sure that all the objects are queued after a certain time period, right? And that both the syncs are two different parameters, I guess. And I didn't check the issue in detail, but it seems this is related to the actually updating the entire cache of the cache, which is mirroring the API server on your local cache. That could, I guess, be slightly longer. You don't have to continuously keep doing it, but for the other part where you want to keep adding the objects in the queue, that could probably a much smaller time period. So for example, what we do is that we make sure that every 5 seconds or 10 seconds, we continuously keep adding the objects and see that in case for any reason, if you have missed the update event or certain event for the particular machine object or machine set or deployment, we can process it again. So maybe that bifurcation we can think of. I did not understand in detail the issue. I have not checked it. And the second parallel point where the use case which was discussed, right? So about the actuator continuously checking whether the two states are matching from the VM side and the. It seems that the better solution there could be is that we know at the moment if someone goes to the cloud provider and deletes the VM, then what should ideally happen is that on your machine object, you should be able to see that Kubernetes has stopped responding via node conditions, and the machine controller should be written in a way that that machine controller identifies that because the node condition is saying that Kubernetes is not responding from last X minutes, now is the time that I should actually replace that particular machine object, rather than actuator, after every resync period we invoke the actuator, and actuator goes and check whether VM exists or not. Just thinking out loud. So if we go the approach I just described, then we can also consider more conditions in picture. For example, kubelet not ready is just one condition. Then similar way you can also consider disk pressure. So let's say GKE, the way GKE does is, I guess, is that if from last 30 minutes the disk pressure is high, the same control loop will delete the machine and recreate the machine, because if disk pressure is high, then you can basically not use the machine anymore for new workload. So just wanted to clarify on this, that on the first part there could be two different kinds of timeout periods, and on the second part the problem could be solved differently. Yeah. If it makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, that's a pretty good suggestion. Yeah, I think you actually identified that, there's two things, right? One is the cache of the Kubernetes objects, and second is actually, so maybe, since this is going to be a common issue for across the providers, one idea that just comes out to my mind here is maybe in the core controller, like controller loop, should there be some sort of a periodic, like an independent periodic requeuing that should happen in a generic way for every provider, like for some sane time, right? That the actuators, regardless of the provider implementation, the actuator gets called for, verifying all the objects every X seconds, or maybe a minute or two, regardless, right? To the point of the node, node stop responding, and detecting it the other way around, where from the kubelet point of view, I think that's good. But one of the challenge that I see is, for example, if there is a, like, how do you trade off, like how much time do you need for let's say kubelet to be ready to begin with? So let's say after the VM is being created and powered on, depending on what kind of things are you trying to do on that VM to bring it up. So, I mean, maybe once the VM is ready, after that there could be a different strategy, but maybe in the initial process where you are actually just creating it might be slightly different, because of the time needed for it to come up might be different. But I think, yeah, that also has something that we should definitely think about. It's a good suggestion, I think.
Actually, that's a perfect point. So we actually recently divided the timeout. So we had the same timeout for VM creation and VM being unhealthy and then being deleted. So we basically divided the timeout into the VM creation timeout, where we prefer to give slightly more time to VM for creation, and then VM unhealthy is completely different situation, where it's actually a problem, a very generic problem, in a way that if kubelet stops responding, then there is no good way to actually identifying that what could have gone wrong. It could be because of the network issue, or it could be actually VM is just somehow deleted and so on. But yeah, I agree with the point that there could be two different timeouts there, and you can handle it that way. And it could be you have to still decide, and the actual parameter could be same across all the cloud providers.
All right. Anything else on this topic before we move on?
Yeah, I think there was one other part of the question, and that is, should we document this in Kitbook, or should we implement this in code for all providers? Maybe that's something we hash out in the PR, but I think that's an important question to resolve.
I think the question that I would have there is it something that we can implement it in a common way, or is it something that needs to be implemented on the provider side because of the way that we're implementing today?
Sure.
I suggest we go on.
Oh, I had the same question as Jason, because when we looked at the code yesterday with Siddharth, where this resync period is set is in the controller runtime manager, and that is instantiated in some code that is not generated. So every provider, hand wrote that code, although it looks like it's relatively the same. So just something that we'll have to figure out.
Yeah, I agree. I would also suggest that we make it short enough that developers are more likely to hit it. Like 10 hours is a long time to be running a single process as a developer. And so if we make it 5 minutes, people will see this and at least go like, 5 minutes, is that too often or not? but we have to make sure it is still overridable for different scenarios.
Yeah, I agree with shortening it. We definitely had to make use. We definitely had to put stuff in the machine controller to do locking, for example, when it was reconciling every 10 minutes. And we might not have noticed that now.
So I think at this point we definitely want to document it, and then we can probably follow up and discuss on an issue whether or not we want to implement a shared code solution down the line. And with that, I think that's actually a pretty good segue into the next topic, which is from Pablo for questions around contributing to the documentation.
Yes, it's me. That's a pretty quick question that I have been going through the book and trying to reproduce what is there. I found so far a couple of issues. Both are solved in the sense that I know how to solve it, but I don't know how to put that solution into the book. There are two problems there. In one case, it's obvious where should I put there, because it's just adding a couple of lines in a code that we already have there, say copy paste, and now we need to modify that. It's very easy. And the other one is a little tricky because I don't know exactly where to put it. So, but in any case, I don't know how to test the documentation. I mean, my previous experience in other documentation systems is that it's trickier because sometimes you don't have all the tooling locally just to generate all the document and be sure that what you put there is exactly what is going to appear there in the final document. So I don't know how to test documentation. I mean, I don't know, even not familiar with the tooling we're using for documentation. So it's kind of meta problem. But because it's usually documentation where it's easiest to contribute the initially, because you are reading that and you find stuff that doesn't solve. At the same time, it's not easy to fix because I don't know how we actually document stuff.
Okay, so I spent a few hours on this morning. I have a really old PR. I'm terribly truant on getting this merged. Let me post this to chat real quick. So changes can be tested locally. They do require you to have all of the, oh, someone already posted it. They require you to have certain tools. So you need to use NPM to install various plugins. But testing can be done locally just by typing getbook serve and then browsing localhost port 4000. So I can clean this PR up such that the release notes are clear in terms of how to locally test. What I spent a few hours on this morning is I have a problem with how to update the GH pages branch. So a lot of the Gitbook work was copied from the KubeBuilder work, and KubeBuilder uses something called Firebase to do the releases. Firebase requires somebody to create an account. It costs some nominal amount of money. And it also requires you to do manual releases of the Gitbook each time you build it. Now, GH Pages also requires manual building, but the difference is it's free and we can PR the changes. What I found is I'm finding it difficult to update the GH Pages branch while maintaining history. And so this really needs to be resolved. We've got at least 3 different Gitbook changes that have been made that I have not been able to update, so they're not live yet. And I'd like to talk to Robbie throughout the week or maybe during the next meeting and consider switching to Firebase. I think that will resolve the release process problem and make it possible for us to release more frequently. In the meantime, what I would suggest is to go ahead and make changes to the Gitbook and then just know that when people say, why aren't these live? The answer is because David doesn't know how to solve it yet, and he's trying to. And I'll try to get that resolved by next week, because this has gone on too long.
So one thing to keep in mind, I heard rumblings of potential for upstream supported sub-project documentation sites. I don't know the actual state of that, so if anybody else is more aware of those conversations, please provide more context. But I think if that does come to fruition, we'd want to jump on that versus having kind of a bespoke kind of docs process.
I can tell you what, so Ben Deodar did in the Kind project. So he created a Netlify account. Netlify is a platform for docs. And he created an account and basically hosted the documentation in a folder under master, the master branch. So you basically, when you push to Netlify, and he has a subdomain. For instance, the subdomain could be clusterapi.netlify.something else. And we can essentially acquire a subdomain that is specific to Cluster API, or like a better domain name. The problem is that, to my understanding, the problem is the push, and also this requires to move away from Gitbook to something like Hugo. That's a rather big change at this point. Like David, I didn't understand, like, what's the problem with keeping history in the branch? Can you explain, please?
The way that the GH Pages branch was created was by pushing a prefix directory into that branch to populate it. And the difficulty I'm having is that I can force push additional changes there, but then someone with administrative access has to then force push those changes up to GH Pages, the upstream branch. What we'd really like to do is to merge those changes into the GH branch so that a PR can be put up. I put up a PR which attempts to do that earlier this morning. But let me see where it is. Oh, so I went ahead and was able to merge the changes into the GH Pages branch and push it up. And then the next thing you notice is that all PR checks fail, because the GH Pages branch is really just documentation. It doesn't include any code. So the whole thing just kind of ends up being hokey.
I see.
So I think we can configure Prow to ignore certain branches. So that could be a way to solve the check issue.
Okay.
Yes, we can skip all the tests except, for instance, like spelling checks and stuff, if a certain path is updated. I think this is doable. Another question here: is it not possible to use master for GitHub pages?
Maybe. GitHub provides 3 ways that you can serve GitHub pages. One is by using a GH Pages branch. The other is by using the well-known docs directory, which currently we have additional documentation in. So we would have to take the non-Gitbook documentation out of that directory and put it somewhere else. And then there's a third way, which escapes me at the moment. But suffice to say, GitHub Pages GitHub Pages is a little bit limited in terms of how you structure your documentation within the repo.
Are there any objections if we go with option 2? Because it seems that it solves all the problems. It seems to me, of course. Basically moving out the existing docs out of docs and complying with the requirements by GitHub Pages to use the docs folder for something specific.
I wouldn't object. I would need to look and see what's in there and where it might go.
The big thing that I would worry about there is that in some cases, the documentation that's currently in docs is linked from external sources, and we would break those links by doing that.
Yep. So maybe we should do it now while the project is still new, because if we do it later, it's going to be much worse. But yeah, there's definitely going to be breakage. But so right now, the consumers, the cloud providers, is the breakage a big concern? That's my point. Like,
well, so backing up though, the way KubeBuilder does this, so I agree that the Netlify Hugo solution is the better long-term solution. I think it's a lot of work, and so as an intermediate goal, I'd like to fix this the way it is. What about using Firebase instead of GH Pages?
so I've been using Firebase in unrelated projects to docs, and you definitely have to pay for Firebase, and it requires the politics of like who is going to pay for the accounts and stuff. So that's the only blocker on my side, I guess. So I think in an open source project, you can definitely avoid the usage of Firebase. But if we think that this is the best solution for cluster API, we should definitely go for it.
Question there. Do we think that would come out of the CNCF funds? Because it feels like something, if it comes out of that bucket, it feels like that would not be hard to get approval for that. I'm happy to take it up with the infra group that's looking at moving stuff to the CNCF infrastructure and see if it would fall in that bucket.
Maybe we could get like a global, or perhaps a number of global Firebase accounts that can serve projects for similar purposes.
Exactly. So that doesn't feel crazy and might not be too political. We have a big bucket, a big chunk of funds on GCP, and we have to make sure that we account for them. But this is the sort of thing that this working group is supposed to do. It's called WG Kate's Infra or WG Infra, and I'm happy to relay it to them, and we can see whether we can just get Firebase accounts. If we want Firebase accounts, and that seems like the best solution other than the money is solvable.
I think that would be great, at least for a short to medium term. And then, are you familiar, Justin, with the discussion that was going on around potential for having sub-project documentation sites?
I am not particularly familiar with that.
So I think that everybody is doing their own thing. Like Ben Deodar is an example that he did his own implementation of docs the way he thinks is the best. So a question about the transition from GitHub docs to GitHub pages to Hugo. Is it actually that much work? I haven't looked at the differences, but I know for sure that the Hugo like markdown parser is super buggy. So that's a downside to Hugo for sure.
So I think the biggest challenge would be is embedding not just transcribing the content, but also being able to embed the Golang structures like we're doing today.
So can we do it in like raw Go files and stuff? It might not be possible. I mean, you can definitely import YAML in Hugo, but I guess this is something that GitHub pages supports. Is that right?
No, it's something that we're leveraging from Gitbook to be able to pull in the structures into the documentation using Doxygen tags. Is that right, David?
Yep, that's it.
That's pretty powerful. Maybe there is a plugin for Hugo, but anyway, given we already went with GitHub pages, I think we should definitely think of solutions for GitHub pages.
Yeah, I was looking at the docs folder in Cluster API, and beside the book, there are only two other directories. One is samples, which has just simple. I don't know if that this is reference elsewhere. I think that's for our own consumption. And the other one is the only that may have external references is the proposals, which currently only has one proposal. So I think that moving the content which is not related to the book outside docs shouldn't be a huge problem. We don't have a lot of stuff there right now. I'm not sure this proposal, what it is reference. I suppose from CAP or something like that, maybe.
Yeah, I know the proposal is linked at least from the cluster API provider AWS documents and some other documents that have gone around talking about cluster API as a high level as well. Yeah, it'll cause a little bit of pain, but maybe now's the time to rip that Band-Aid off though.
So again, the easiest, the fastest solution is to basically move stuff away from the existing docs folder, but we should probably go with the Firebase solution. The problem is that it might take a while. Justin, do you have like an estimate of like how much time can this take? Like
the next meeting is on the 21st, which is just over a week away. I can put it on I can open an issue, and then I'll tag you, Lubomir, and anyone else that wants to be, and we can sort of explain better the needs, and that might actually be faster, because ideally we'd then be able to create some accounts.
Yeah,
we still
sure.
have to figure out permissions. Likely order, I guess, a month, but less than a month, I'd say.
Isn't the next meeting on the 19th of February, actually?
I was just going by the agenda where I put it in. It says the 21st, but you're right, that doesn't add up. So I don't know.
So it's next Tuesday, to my understanding.
I'm opening my calendar. It is next. Oh, we may have moved it. No, wait, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I'm sorry.
So yesterday we had a meeting too, if I remember correctly, the Case Infra team. So it's weekly. It's weekly. So unless it's moved to Thursday.
I have it on my calendar for Wednesday at 11:30 Eastern, so 8:30 Pacific. Wednesday the 20th.
Wednesday. So you had a meeting today?
I have it as a bi-weekly meeting.
Wow.
But we can. I'll open an issue and we can talk about it.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out calendar. Yeah.
I'm gonna post a message in the Cluster API Slack later.
Oh, this is the okay. This is the working group infra meeting though, but yes.
All right. Do we want to take the rest of this offline async? And I guess Lubomir and David can coordinate on potential changes and then make sure to sync back with Justin prior to whenever we find out the next meeting is to potentially request a Firebase account or not.
Sounds good.
All right, great. Any other topics? Going once?
Do we want to look at where we are on the road to V1 Alpha 1?
Yeah, we can go ahead and do that. Let me, I can't actually share my screen to do that if somebody else is interested in doing that. My Zoom is on a different computer than the rest of my work right now. I know we were trending in the right direction as far as issues. I haven't seen any issues that haven't been triaged yet, so I think we're on a good path right now. If you're looking for any issues and if they're already assigned to somebody, feel free to reach out to them if it's not marked as Lifecycle active to contribute.
Okay, sounds fair.
All right. Anything else before we wrap up for the day? All right. Hope you all have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.